All of this makes me wonder what former Twitter exec Yoel Roth was thinking when Musk challenged the BBC to come up with an example of hate speech on the platform. Roth was the head of trust and safety at Twitter, the guy who was responsible for content moderation and for tackling hate and misinformation on the site. He resigned in November 2022, just weeks after Musk took over, writing in the New York Times that a Twitter whose policies are defined by edict has little need for a trust and safety function dedicated to its principled development. And apparently, that rubbed Musk the wrong way, because the following week, the chief twit posted an out-of-context quote from Roth's PhD dissertation, smearing him, causing people to attack Roth as a, quote, groomer. With one tweet, the floodgates opened. Roth received thousands of threats, and he was eventually forced to sell his home and move in order to protect himself and his husband. Earlier this month, Roth reflected on this experience and the wave of hate he received at the hands of Musk and his online army, and before that, at the hands of Trump. As Roth wrote once more on the New York Times op-ed page, few people could be expected to take a job doing so if the cost is their life or liberty. We all need to recognize this new reality and to plan accordingly. It is a truly frightening reality, and here to talk about it is the man himself, Yoel Roth. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Yoel, can you describe to our viewers what happened when Elon Musk wrongly accused you, a gay man, of advocating for children having access to adult internet services back in your PhD thesis, which led to the barrage of groomer accusations against you? Where were you when you saw that tweet? What was your reaction? And what happened to you next in your life?
Thank you for having me. When that post first went up from Elon Musk, I was at home already dealing with a barrage of harassment following my resignation from the company. I had tried to leave Twitter quietly. I hadn't attacked Elon Musk or the company. In fact, when I quit my job, I had a phone call with him and said that I was rooting for him and rooting for Twitter's success. And yet, in response to provocations from many of the accounts he interacts with on Twitter, many of the people that you cited today, he posted an out-of-context extract from my dissertation, completely warping what the words on the page actually say. His argument was that Twitter's longstanding challenges and struggles with child sexual abuse, work that the company had been doing for years to address, was in fact not just a problem that all social media companies face, but the product of my decisions and in fact my desire to enable child sexual abuse on the internet. Nothing could be further from the truth. But almost as soon as that tweet went out, it unleashed a torrent of abuse, both on Twitter, by email, by phone calls and text messages, every medium imaginable. I was called a groomer. I was told I should be thrown into a wood chipper alive, a particular favorite of 4chan users as a punishment for gay people. And ultimately, as a product of the harassment and ultimately the disclosure of where my husband and I lived, I had to leave my home. I had to sell my house. I lived in hiding for a number of months. And only recently have I started speaking publicly again about what I experienced because of Mr. Musk's speech.
We appreciate you coming on the show to speak, given the threats. And I have to ask, do you still have to have security? I had Dr. Fauci on the show the other week, and it's deeply depressing how many people in American public life now have to have security because people are being incited against them by either Donald Trump or Elon Musk or both.
The normalization of this type of violent rhetoric and violent conduct against public figures is what's really striking to me. The fact that somebody who thought they were going to be a college professor like me, somebody who is a doctor like Dr. Fauci, have to think about personal safety as a consequence of just doing our jobs is a really striking new reality. I will say, I think in some ways, Mr. Musk's campaign slightly over-rotated. He deployed everything all at once. I had to move. I had to sell my home. My address now is not known. And so I feel safer now and better able to speak in public again. But there's lots of people for whom displacing their family and having to relocate is not something that's a viable option.
So, Yoel, why do you think Elon Musk pushes homophobic conspiracies against you, against Paul Pelosi, pushes anti-Semitic conspiracies against George Soros, against the ADL? Is it because he's a homophobe and an anti-Semite, or is he just doing it for clicks, for attention, because he likes trolling?
I think there's three explanations here that are important. The first is we should stop pretending that Elon Musk's politics are mercurial. This is a narrative that keeps being advanced in the media, that somehow we don't know, is he a Republican? Is he a Democrat? I think we know. I think he's made clear what his viewpoints are. But second, I do very much think that he values the cycle of attention that he receives when he engages in this inflammatory conduct. The endorphin rush that comes with 150 million people telling him that he's right and doing his bidding. But I think there's an underlying strategy here that's really important and that goes beyond just seeking gratification. I think this is a strategy to silence people. I believe Mr. Musk was quite intentional when he attacked me after I left Twitter. I believe what he was trying to do was ensure that I wouldn't speak up about him or about the company in the future. And the way that he tried to secure that was by intimidating me into silence. I don't think it's accidental.
How can that be, Yoel? He's a free speech champion. How could he want to silence you? I find that hard to believe. He's a free speech absolutist. What are you saying? I'm shocked. Let me ask you this. You worked alongside Elon Musk for 14 days between his takeover of the company and your resignation. I got to ask, what was he like to work for? To me, from a distance, he comes across as a thin-skinned man-child. For example, the tech newsletter platform actually reported that Musk called a meeting to yell at staff because his tweets weren't getting enough amplification. What were your personal interactions with him like? Did he come across as someone who knows what he's doing, who's stable?
You know, it's funny. In the 2 weeks that I was working closely with him, I actually did find him to be a relatively rational business executive. I found that if I presented him with evidence and facts and made recommendations, that he took those recommendations and listened. When Twitter first banned Kanye West for his anti-Semitic tweets, I made that recommendation to Mr. Musk. And despite being a professed free speech absolutist who doesn't want to ban anyone, he agreed. He agreed it was the right decision. In another instance, when there was a rise in racist content on Twitter, I again presented the facts and the evidence to Mr. Musk and recommended that Twitter take aggressive action against it. And he agreed and encouraged me and my team to even move faster. What I learned from this is that Mr. Musk's decision-making is deeply shaped by the information that he gets. When you put good information in front of him, I think he's able to process it rationally and make good decisions. When he's exposed to a torrent of garbage on Twitter, unfortunately, he starts to make worse decisions.
He's deeply credulous online. There is this conventional wisdom on the right, among some liberals too, Yoel, that Twitter is biased against conservative voices, which countless studies show is not the case. You seem to suggest in your latest Times op-ed that you think Twitter actually gave conservatives like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the anti-LGBTQ account Libs of TikTok special treatment, multiple passes that others didn't get.
Inevitably, content moderation decisions live in a gray area, especially when you're talking about high-profile individuals like members of Congress or presidents. There's always going to be some space for debate about what the right enforcement action is. And faced with that ambiguity, my experience is that Twitter and other platforms sometimes shy away from enforcement, especially because they are worried about adverse consequences, like some of the ones that I faced after Twitter first moderated then-President Donald Trump. These intimidation campaigns that target individual platform staffers can actually have a chilling effect on the decisions that companies ultimately make. And we largely see these campaigns coming from the right. This isn't a tactic that is unique to the American right or even to the United States, but it's one that's risen in prominence. And the targeting of tech employees is a phenomenon that I'm particularly worried about going into the 2024 elections.
So let's talk about content moderation. You're quoted in the so-called Twitter files reporting, the leaked emails from your company, as saying you were not comfortable with some of the requests you were getting from the FBI for information on foreign influence around the time of the 2020 election. So why did you carry on meeting with the FBI, in your words, on a weekly basis? Even if we agree the FBI was not censoring tweets, they were flagging them for you and your colleagues to rule on, you do seem to have had a way too comfortable and too close a relationship with a federal law enforcement agency, did you not?
I wouldn't agree that the relationship was close or comfortable. I would say that it was necessary. In 2016, platforms failed to respond to Russian interference in the election, largely because they didn't have the relevant information that would have helped them identify and address those threats in real time. The solution to that was better information sharing between platforms and the government, and the FBI quickly emerged as the primary conduit for that information sharing. Now, there was mutual wariness in that relationship. There was a recognition by platforms that this could be a vehicle for government jawboning attempts to influence how platforms make their choices, and that also it could be intrusive on the privacy of Twitter's users. But there was a recognition that our responsibility to address election security risks compelled us to have a channel for receiving information from government. And so we had regular meetings, we engaged regularly, but we did so with a recognition that we had to keep that within a specific box of exchanging information only about election security risks.
But your critics would say it got too friendly. If you read the emails, they're very friendly. This is the government. This is the FBI with a private company. And you yourself are quoted as saying you're not comfortable about some of the things they're asking you to do.
I would say that's a sign of...
Do you regret any of that?
Yeah. I don't. I think the interactions that we had with the FBI sometimes were friendly. An FBI agent wished me a Happy New Year at one point. But if you look at the substance of even what was disclosed selectively in the Twitter files, there's no examples of the FBI making coercive demands or of Twitter acquiescing to them. In fact, what you see is the opposite. You see that despite this friendliness, we regularly push back on requests from the government, and the government backs off. And so I think that wariness actually worked, despite the fact that we had built this effective information sharing relationship.
Have a watch of this exchange that I had with Twitter Files reporter Matt Taibbi on this show back in April. You just said this, we think it's the CIA. I said I haven't seen a single Twitter file where the CIA tells Yoel Roth to take it down.
We showed reports that came through the Foreign Interference Task Force. We know it came through the FBI. We know that's the destination by which it came. But the origin of the document, we couldn't determine.
Now, Yoel, we know from The Intercept's Twitter Files reporting that Twitter on your watch was allowing the Pentagon to not just set up a bunch of Twitter accounts and online personas to push U.S. military propaganda in the Middle East, but also to conceal their affiliation with those Twitter accounts. So I just want to give you a chance to respond here. Were you also, as Matt Taibbi claims, allowing the CIA to use and exploit Twitter too, directly or indirectly?
No. Let me be very clear. The decision that was made to temporarily allow a number of accounts operated by the Department of Defense to misrepresent their origin was one that, as soon as I discovered it and Twitter leadership became aware of it, we banned, and then we took the additional step of publicly disclosing it. We know about this campaign now because Twitter voluntarily shared data about it with the public and exposed what this campaign actually was. Researchers at the Stanford Internet Observatory have published a study looking in great detail at exactly what this campaign was. I think Twitter's exchanges with the intelligence community should be concerning. They concern me. They concerned me as they were happening. But there's always trade-offs here. And I think the recognition that election security risks are a clear and present danger to American democracy and to democracies around the world requires platforms to engage in some of these slightly uncomfortable practices in service of broader security goals. And that's what we did. But I believe we were able to do so without compromising on the fundamental principles of integrity, consistency, and the enforcement of our policies as they were written.
Last quick question to you. I want to ask about the role of the Saudis within Twitter. They are the second biggest investors in the site. They were also major players in the pre-Musk Twitter too. And last year, a former Twitter employee was found guilty in federal court of using the site to spy for Saudi Arabia on Saudi dissidents. How can Twitter, or X, claim to be a free speech site given the Saudis' involvement and given Musk's well-documented pattern of rolling over for foreign autocrats and authoritarians?
It's a very real risk. I testified at the trial of that former employee, and I'm very glad to see that conviction. I think what happened when the Saudi government pursued Twitter employees to get them to exfiltrate data was a very real risk to vulnerable people in Saudi Arabia on Twitter, and it undermined the effectiveness of the platform, its role in the world as a critical conduit for free speech by vulnerable people. I worry that the defenses that Twitter built up following that incident have been eroded under Musk. I worry that the company's investment in addressing state-backed disinformation, including from the Saudi government, is no longer happening. And I worry that the financial chumminess between the company's executives and the Saudi royal family will make it harder for the company to crack down on these efforts in the future. It's hard to know, especially now that Twitter isn't a public company. There's less scrutiny, there's less auditability, and there's less visibility into the company's choices and actions. I worry about what that'll mean.
You say it's hard to know. If we were to, one thing I always wonder about the Twitter files reporting, the selective leak of emails, as you say, are there emails knocking around within Twitter, either from pre-Musk days or post-Musk days, with Saudi requests for takedowns?
The Saudi government and nearly every government around the world would regularly contact Twitter demanding the removal of content. The Saudi government in particular loved to report the presence of pornography on Twitter and say, this is illegal in Saudi Arabia. How can you permit it on the service? The difference between then and now was that Twitter regularly pushed back on those demands. Twitter had a practice of not blindly complying with government demands for censorship, but instead resisting them, sometimes in court, and critically disclosing its resistance in regular transparency reporting. The Twitter, or I guess X of today, does none of that.
Yoel Roth, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Please do stay safe.